Evening, good morning, welcome. My name is Dan York, and I am the Director of Online Content, and I work for Internet Society, and I live in Vermont, in the United States. I've studied French a little bit, so I can speak a little bit of French, just a little. I apologize. I will be making my presentation in English.
Apologies, it seemed I could only switch the language when I was not sharing my screen. Okay, so I'm here to talk about how we can secure our web servers, what we're doing, how we can make this, this work better in some way. So I'm going to talk a little bit and I'll provide some information, and then I'll provide a time for questions. And you can ask the questions, of course, in French. Victor is here to help us with that. As he mentioned, you can ask them in the Q&A. You can ask them in the chat. You also will have the ability to go and ask them live as well. We can do all of those kind of things. So the object today is to talk about how we can make our web servers more secure and also more available to people all across the world. We want them obviously to be as secure as possible. We also want to make our content available to people everywhere, including people in areas of the world that may not have strong internet access. They may have low bandwidth. They may not have a great connection. So we want to do all of that using the open standards that power the internet. I will talk a bit about the project, but I'm also mostly going to talk about some of the security and availability tools we have to help us with our websites for our chapters and pieces like that. So the Open Standards Everywhere project is a project we did in 2020 to develop some documentation for how to make web servers more secure and available. If you think about the internet is powered by open standards. This slide shows a number of different protocols and standards that we are using right now to communicate. We are communicating over IP and TCP and HTTPS. We're using some of these protocols right now in this Zoom session to be able to communicate. These open standards are the fundamental building blocks of an open internet. They're a critical property of what we call the internet way of networking. So it's critical for us. Now, for us as the Internet Society, we want to help promote these open standards that anybody can read, anybody can use, anybody can deploy. They're openly available to all. So we want to see these open standards deployed everywhere. And we want to see them deployed on our servers as well. We want our websites to lead by example, to provide an example of what websites should be doing, so that when we go out and tell governments or businesses or companies, organizations, that they should use the latest version of TLS for security, we want to be doing it ourselves. So we can show, do what we're doing, use the latest standards, this is how it can work. So that's what this project is about, and that's what we'll be talking about over this next 45 minutes or so. There will be some time for questions, and I will pause at appropriate times and ask for it. These slides, this other material will be available as well. So let me begin by saying that in order to know how well we're doing, we need to use a test platform. And there is a test platform called internet.nl. And if you go to that website, you can go and test your own website. and you can see how well is it doing for security and availability. And if you go there, you'll see that you'll be given a score, that says how much of your score, how well your site works for doing this. And that's something that you can use to determine how much work do I need to do? What can I work with? This is what we use as part of the project to look at how do we make our websites as secure and available as possible. This project and the documentation focuses on the connection between a web browser and a web server. It's that connection between those. How secure is it when you connect from your web browser, which could be Google Chrome, Mozilla Firefox, Apple Safari, any of the mobile web browsers? How secure is that connection between the browser and the server? That's what we're looking at here. There's a lot more to website security beyond that, of course. There's the pages, who can log into the website, what can be done there. And those are a bit more than what we can cover just in this time we have today. Today, we're talking about how do we secure that connection between the web browser and the web server. Now, the project that we did in 2020, and that you all have access to the information, did three main things. We set up some reference servers where people could be able to see what does a good web server look like. If a web server is as secure and available as possible, how does it work? What is it? So we set up some reference servers. We wrote about it. We documented the work we did. And then we are continuing to lead by example with what we do in our main web servers. And also we're looking to work with you to increase the security of your web servers as well. There are some reference servers available that you can have. But the main part is that we have put our documentation up in a place on GitHub where you can access it. Je suis désolé, right now it is only available in English. We're working to translate it to French and to Spanish. It's not available yet in those forms, but it will be. We will have that over this year translated into French and Spanish as well. And we would also welcome it if chapters want to translate it into other languages. We would welcome that as well. For our leading by example, we went through and looked at all of our 25 plus websites that we operate for the Internet Society. And we looked at them and said, how well do they work? How secure are they? How available are they? And as part of the work we did, we then, over the past scope of 2020 and continuing now, we improved them. On this chart that you see here, there's a lot of red no's, meaning that those sites did not work that way yet. So we've changed that. We're now about 94% on that internet.nl test that's out there. This is where we would love to work with you as chapters and special interest groups to help improve your sites so they can also be as secure as possible, so that we can collectively lead the internet in having secure websites in different ways. We are continuing, well, the project did its work in 2020, created this documentation in English, did this part. We're continuing to watch what's happening in the industry. For instance, there's work to create what's called HTTP 3. It uses something called the QUIC protocol. This work is still being standardized within the IETF. So it's still being developed inside the IETF. When it becomes a standard, we will then update these documents, so that all of you can learn how to make your websites work over HTTP 3. So it's some work that we will be continuing to do in this time ahead. Now, before I begin talking about the specific pieces, I want to talk about 3 types of web servers. One of them is what we call self-hosted. Okay, it's a server that you have on a machine, a virtual machine, une machine virtuelle, or you are able to, you have it on an actual server in a data center. You might run this web server yourself. You can go into it, you can change things, you can modify things, you can work with that, you can do all of those kind of things. A second kind of web server is one that you have hosted with a website host. And that could be anyone from a site like WordPress.com, the hosted service. It could be anyway, there's hundreds or thousands of web hosting providers. The key is that you can't make many changes to it. Well, you can change the content, but you cannot change the configuration. And then there's a third type of site that you might have, which is, in English, we call it a content delivery network. I see in French, it's referred to as an RDC, but in English, we call it a CDN, a content delivery network, which is in front of a website. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit about what that means and how this relates to our to the standards we're going to talk about. If you have a self-hosted server, all right, you can make the changes we'll talk about. You're able to do that. If your server is hosted by someone, you may not be able to make too many changes. The web hosting provider is the one who can make the changes. What we tell people is contact the support team, send an email, raise a support ticket, do something like that for your web hosting. Many times, the web hosting providers, when they're asked, why don't you support TLS 1.3? The answer is because nobody asks us. So if you use a web hosting provider, please ask your web hosting provider for the security protocols we're going to be talking about. They need to hear that people want TLS 1.3, that they want HSTS, that they want IPv6. They need to hear that. Beyond that, what you can do is you can potentially configure other settings. You may be able to do some. Sometimes you may have to move to another hosting provider if this is important to you. The other option is to use, sometimes, is to use a content delivery network, okay, which is on this slide. I'll talk a bit about it. In the beginning of the web, in the 1990s, this was how the web worked. You had a web server, you have a web browser. The browsers connect to the web server. This is how you get information. What happened, though, is that when a lot of people, when many web browsers tried to connect to that web server, it would slow down, it would stop, it wouldn't work, it would become overloaded. And so a number of years ago now, people started to use what is called a content delivery network, a CDN in English, RDC en français. And what a CDN does is it takes a copy of your website and it caches it. It puts it out into edge servers that are located all over the world. And so when you come and visit www.internetsociety.org, you do not do this on this slide. You do not go back to the original server. Instead, you go to the closest, what we call an edge server. You go to that server and you get a copy of our website. So depending upon where you are, you might be connecting to an edge server. You might be connecting to an edge server in Frankfurt, or in Nairobi or Kigali or Cape Town or New York. It could be anywhere in the world. It could be in Sydney, Australia, wherever is closest to you, you are connecting to that server or that local copy, and you're getting that information. It gets it very fast. Many times these edge servers are with a internet exchange point, an IXP. And so they're very close to where you might be connecting. So this is what it does. A CDN speeds up the performance of your website and lets people connect to it very easily like that. Now, a CDN can also do other things like provide IPv6 connections, even if your original website does not. Your web server may only support IPv4 and not IPv6, but with a CDN, the CDN can support IPv6 and let people connect to it that way. It's a very fast and it's a good way to go and do that. It can be the same way with TLS, with DNSSEC, with pieces like that, you can go and do it. CDNs can also protect your website against attacks if you were to have a lot of them in some way. There are many CDNs out there. Some of them do not have a cost. Some of them do. There's a variety of choices out there. The Internet Society, we have websites that have worked with Akamai, with Amazon CloudFront, with Cloudflare. We've worked with others in various different ways. They're a tool that you can go and use. I'll mention, I'll skip, the slides have some information that may come into play if you're going to work with that. But I want to now talk about security of systems. And very specifically, I want to talk about TLS. Okay. So transport layer security, or TLS, is what we used to call secure socket layer, or SSL. SSL was first created back in the 1990s. And then it became TLS in 1999 and continued on through today. But sometimes we still talk about it as SSL. But this is the secure encrypted connection between the web browser and your web server. This is the encryption that allows you to go and have a secure connection. This is something, if you can make any change to your website, this is it. The number one change I would ask you to make is make sure your site works over TLS, that it has HTTPS at the beginning of its URL. That's important because it shows that you have a secure website that people can connect to securely. It helps the Internet Society, all of us, with our overall goal of getting encryption everywhere. And it will make your site more secure. It can potentially help with Google search results. Google gives priority to sites that use HTTPS, use the secure version of HTTP. If you do not have TLS on your website and you host it yourself, there's a site called Let's Encrypt, let'sencrypt.org, that provides a way that you can go and get free certificates that are secure that let you go and connect. So you can use that as a way to work. Also, if you use a content delivery network, a CDN, they can also provide that. Now, if you host your own web server, we have instructions in the GitHub area. We have the instructions there about how you can use and configure your hosted server, your self-hosted server. If you do it with Apache, with Nginx, we have the instructions right there that explain how to do it. We also have instructions for a couple of the CDNs that you can be able to use. So we have instructions there that can work with it. That's one part of what you can do. Now, once you have your server with TLS, if you use the internet.nl test, you'll see it still may say you are not secured enough. And that's because even with TLS, there are some ways that you can that you can make it more secure. So one of the ways is something around configuring the cipher order. TLS uses a number of different cryptographic algorithms to go and do the actual encryption. You can specify the order that you want to use, and you can have the most secure algorithms used first. If you think about it, to give a different analogy, I speak English, I speak German, and I speak a little bit of French. So if you want to speak with me, you will come to know that your best connection with me, to speak with me, will be in English. Next would be German, and next would be French. So you can know that to speak with Dan York, or to communicate with me, you should first try English, then German, then French. That's the order that I can communicate with you in. This is similar. You configure your web server to say, I want to use these algorithms in this order. And this is what you can do. Again, our instructions have information about what you can go and do if with your self-hosted servers to go and make these changes. The instructions also have some information about how you can go and make changes with some of the content delivery networks that are out there. So this is one of the things you can do to make it more secure. Another thing you can do to increase the security of your website is use something called HSTS. Now, this is a configuration setting that says, always connect to my web server securely. So, because a web browser can try to connect insecurely using regular HTTP, and sometimes the web server might say, oh, okay, I'll give you unencrypted, insecure HTTP. When you set this configuration option up, it will say, always communicate securely. Do not ever drop back to insecure HTTP. Another way to think about this is, you could, after getting to know me, you may know that the best language is to speak English with me. And so you might make a note in your mind to say, always speak to Dan in English. You're just setting a setting there. It says, always speak English to Dan. That's kind of what this does. It is a setting in your server that says, only communicate over TLS. If you try to connect, it tells the web browsers this. Do not connect over plain old HTTP. Just connect on HTTPS. Always go secure. This is something that you can configure. Again, we have instructions, so you can be able to read what to do. It's very easy, okay? And you can just go and put one line in a configuration file, and you'll be able to go and have this take place. You can also, again, it's a simple configuration there. Some of the CDNs have a setting for this. It's again in our information that we have here. One last part to mention, which is that we do have there are other settings that you can do to go and make your server even more secure. They're called HTTP security headers. These are additional settings that you can do to go and make this. Sometimes these are very easy to do. You can just configure them in your web browser. I mean, sorry, in your web server in the configuration file, and then you restart the configuration, the server, and you can have it work. They can be very easy to go and do. Again, the documentation provides some suggestions, some pointers for how you can go and work with this. So that's a bit on the web server side. I want to talk about another way to secure your website, which is to use something called DNSSEC. And we have a lot of information about this, but the basic way to think about it is when you go to www.internetsociety.org, your web browser asks the local DNS system, what is the IP address? What is the address for www.internetsociety.org? The DNS system will give back an answer. Your web browser will connect. You'll be able to get the website, etc. It's possible for an attacker to get in the middle there and send the wrong information. You could wind up going to some other website. DNSSEC is a way to secure the DNS information so that you can be able to be sure that the information you're getting is correct. That's what DNSSEC does. It says www.internetsociety.org is this address. You can be sure of that. You can trust the answer. That's what it does. It's called DNS security extensions. The one challenge is that it involves several different parts to make this work. So it's a little different from what we talked about before. But what happens is you, as an Internet Society chapter, you may register your domain. You'll register that domain with a registrar. Now, the registrar may also provide DNS service for that domain, or you may use another provider, an operator, to provide the actual DNS information. Picture looks kind of like this, and I just realized this slide is in English. Je suis désolé, sorry about that. But anyway, the parts that are here, there's a registrar that you connect with, there's an operator, and they have to send some information up to the registry that operates this. So for instance, the Internet Society has a registrar. We have somebody who operates the DNS for internetsociety.org. We make changes there. When we make changes, our registrar has to send some information to the people that operate.org. So there's a couple of steps there. There is some information here, which may help. And then again, we also have some information out in the GitHub repository that will go and give a little bit more of a background of what needs to be done. If you're using a content delivery network, many times they will just pass the information along. It should not be too much of a question there. Let me pause and just ask Victor, are there questions that we see? Oh, I'm seeing some here. Sure. So let me, I'm about to talk about HTTP 2. So I'll answer that question in a couple of minutes, and I'll explain what the difference is between HTTP 2 and HTTP 3. So that one I will answer in a few minutes. As far as the other one goes, what we're talking about here is really about people who are attacking your network, the connection between your web browser and your web server. Okay, we're looking at that level of attack on the network itself and the pieces that are there. There are other attacks. There are attacks against the login interfaces on your web browser, on your web server. There are attacks against your databases. There are attacks against other things. Those are also important for securing your web server. They're not, we can't fit them into this session today, but those are other elements that are also important. This project is really looking at that network layer connection that we have to go. Let me see what else. Okay. So let me go on and talk a little bit more, and then we'll come back to some more questions that are here. So we've been primarily talking about security, but I also want to talk about availability and making your chapter websites available to more people in more parts of the world in different areas. One of those ways is with IPv6. IPv6 is something that at the Internet Society we've been talking about for a very long time, and we continue to work with. And what IPv6 does is it allows your websites to connect to even more people around the world who are using on newer networks in newer places. Recently, in 2020, Apple provided some information that they found that connections to their networks were faster over IPv6 than they were over IPv4. So it also can potentially provide some performance increase. So something good to know with this. Now, how do you know if you have IPv6? One way that you can look is you can look at if you have a Mac, an Apple computer, or if you have a if you have a Linux system, you can use a command called dig in a terminal window. You can just type in something like you see here, and you can be able to find out, does your chapter's website have an IPv6 record? If it does, it's fairly simple to go and configure what you need. Now, if you have a hosting provider, you will need to contact them and see if you can get them to go and configure a system to add IPv6. If you are hosting it yourself, both Apache and Nginx are very easy to change. In some cases, it's already set that way. And so you can be able to go and work with it there. If you use a CDN will also allow you to do IPv6. Now, what you'll find is that once you have your server set up, you will need to add something called a quad A. It's AAAA, that record in DNS. This will point from your domain name to the IPv6 address of your website. Once you do this, people will then be able to connect to your server over IPv6. Again, we have some information about this in GitHub. It's available there. I mentioned the CDNs. This is a great way to provide IPv6 to websites that don't have it. I have a couple of my own websites are with a hosting provider that only supports the older IPv4. They do not do IPv6. I have asked them. I have emailed them. I have sent them support tickets. They will not add IPv6. I could move that site, but it's a lot of work. It's an old site, thousands of pages. It would be a lot of work. So what I did was I used a CDN. I used a free version of a CDN to put that in front of my website. And by doing this, I can now provide IPv6 connections to my material, even though my old web host only supports IPv4. This is a great place where you can go and use a CDN in some way. Now, let's talk about HTTP2. HTTP2 was created in 2015, or fully standardized in 2015. It provides a faster connection for people to connect to your website. In fact, Apple last year found that connections were almost 2 times as fast. 1.8 times faster was what Apple found. And they found that connections happen that much quicker. HTTP2 is supported by all web browsers these days. And it's often just a very simple change in your configuration file to allow it to work for you on your server. If you have a hosted provider, again, you'll need to go and ask them. Many of them probably have it already, okay? But you'll need to ask them and say, can you please support this if they don't? If you're going to do it on a self-hosted environment, it's a little bit more complicated with Apache. It's very simple with Nginx. And we do have instructions, and again, in the OSE documentation. For the CDNs, most of them do it by default. They want to make your websites faster, and so they make it available that way. So that's how they work. So now, the other question that was asked was, what about HTTP 3? So HTTP 3 is a new version. It's still being standardized. So it's being developed within the IETF. It uses a protocol called QUIC, Q-U-I-C. It uses a protocol called QUIC. And HTTP 3, some web browsers and web servers currently support it today, but it's not yet a full standard. So they're supporting early versions. I hope that sometime here in 2021, web servers will be able to support HTTP 3. It'll be standardized. That will make it even faster and even more secure. And so it'll be something else that we'll be able to add to our Internet Society websites, and that all of you will be able to go and use in your chapter websites. So, and I see a question in the chat. So QUIC is another protocol in the IP. It's like we have TCP, we have UDP, we will also have QUIC. QUIC is a transport protocol. It's used underneath to go and make connections. HTTP 3 is HTTP using QUIC. So it's HTTP 3 is QUIC for the web. Hopefully that helps. When you see people talk about HTTP 3, they're talking about QUIC. And just to make things more confusing, QUIC includes TLS inside of it. So it's all connected in some different ways around some of the pieces that are here. So,
and there are two more questions in the chat, in the Q&A. One is, how do you know when a web host is reliable and secure? And the other one is, in which category do we put web torrent sites, self-host, DRC, and on what basis is their security?
So on the first one of the things you could do, so on the question about, is a web host, how secure are they? One way to look is to put their own website into a site like internet.nl. Put the site for the web host in, see how well they do. That will give you a sense of how good that web hosting provider is. If they are focused on security, and pieces like that, hopefully they will work with that. That would be my first suggestion. There are other places where you can find information about how good a web host may be, but this is one way to test their security in some way. To the second question, if you're looking at a web torrent, usually that is more of a way to allow people access to your website. If I believe what you're talking about is making it available through like a BitTorrent kind of connection or something on that line, you still have a web server somewhere. It's then you're connecting to it over a different way. You're not connecting over HTTP. You're using the torrent protocols in different ways to connect to it. So it's a little different because you're connecting not on the web protocols, but on the torrent protocols, if that helped. And I see in the chat, looks like Olivier is saying, yes, the quick protocols is the transport for HTTP3. Yes, correct. That is there. So I really want to just, I'm coming to the end here a bit, and I'll be able to answer more questions. For the next steps, one of your projects is to create an initiative. This is part of what you'll do here for the Internet Society, the ISOC Fundamentals program. One thing you can do is to write about this program, talk about it, work with people, do some different pieces like that. Another initiative you can do is to see if you can improve your own website. Can you improve the chapter website? The nice piece about that is that you can use the internet.nl site to get a score of where you're at right now. And so maybe your web server is currently at 54%. You can do some of the techniques that we talk about here to go and improve that site. And so your initiative can be, you started at 54, now you're at 86, something like that. It can be a way to show that you've made your website more secure. We've also had chapters in the past who have done presentations for local companies, organizations, businesses, and they've done projects there to help them get their websites more secure. You could write a blog article about it. You could create a video for YouTube or perhaps for TikTok or something. I don't know. You could make some kind of way to talk about the importance of using these open standards to create a more secure internet in some way. These are some examples of initiatives. If you talk to your chapter manager, your chapter coordinator, you can come up with other ideas, but these are some that we've proposed so far. I will mention last year, we had a chapter in Kolkata in India that did exactly this. They, after a similar training last year, they saw that their site was only at 32% in the internet.nl test. And so they did a lot of work, and they wound up bringing their website all the way up to 100%. You can read about it at this article on our blog, but that was a tremendous work they did to make their website much more secure, much more available. And then I believe they were planning to do some workshops to talk to people about what they'd done and to be able to work with it a little bit better around that. So this is an example of the kind of initiatives that you could do in some way. You also, if you would like, you can email me. I am, york@isoc.org. You're welcome to email me directly. I'm glad to answer. There is a community on Connect. It is en anglais, it is in English, but it is there that you can ask questions. You can work with us there. You also can go to GitHub, where we have this information. You are welcome to participate there. You can suggest changes. You can suggest ways to improve the documentation. All of that is possible there. So with that, I will say merci, and I will stop this sharing and open it to any questions that we may have.
Thank you very much, Dan. Thank you for the excellent presentation, and thank you also for having responded to the questions that were asked in the Q&A section. I will see if there are any participants that would like to ask questions. I don't see any person that wants to ask a question. There's a comment in the chat section.
I do see that comment, and I can read enough of it en français
Eric,
to understand. Yeah, I can see that. I hear the feedback. I see that. we're trying to make this presentation, help people who can use this and perhaps provide ideas for how people can learn more and explore more on their own, depending upon the type of server they have. But thank you for the feedback.
Thank you, Dan. Eric, can you share your comment live? As Dan has said it, rightly said it, we took note of your comment. I think instructions are practical. The objective here is to help you email. The email address of Dan is available. We cannot technically train you in an hour. It's just an opportunity to discuss about this topic and see how we can together render the internet strong. Even if you have experts amongst us, these cannot ensure that their web servers are up to par and are secure. And that is why that is what we promote within the Internet Society. I don't see any hands. Thank you, Aja, for your comment. Two types of webinars.
Mm-hmm.
We can have two types of webinars. As is suggested here. As Dan clearly indicated, the conversation has just begun. We are available by email. You can contact us by email. We have also a team that works on open standard everywhere. The conversation can continue on other platforms. If ever we have omitted a given point during this webinar, you can contact us by email or via the platform connect.
Yes, and thank you all for the work you're doing in your chapters. Thank you for coming here and listening and talking, and thank you for the work you're doing to make the internet more secure. So the more we can do to do that, to help others, and to lead by example, the more powerful we are as the Internet Society. So thank you for all the work you're doing. And no, the documentation is not yet en français. The documentation, we're finalizing it, and we will be getting it into French and Spanish.
Thank you, Dan. I was actually going to give you the floor for your last words. A person has asked whether we have a Telegram group. We have the Connect platform.
There are
for
so
the
many
time being,
places.
we have this platform to discuss.
Yeah, there are so many places we could have the conversations, but there are only so many hours in the day. So no, we do not have the Telegram, a Telegram group at this time.
Thank you, Dan. I now give you the floor for 1 minute to close our session. But before that, I'd like to remind you, as I said in the beginning, the importance of undertaking an activity is the prime objective. And we would like to help you to change, even a minor change at the chapters level. You can start to implement the recommendations of Dan on your server, on the server of your organization. That is the aim of this session. And this would enable you to obtain a participation certificate to this program. You should work with the coordinator of the chapter for the implementation of your initiative at the local level. Some ideas of initiatives have been presented by Dan, and there are also links provided in the chat section by my colleague Kelly regarding the promotion of open standard everywhere. On this, I will now give back the floor to Dan for his closing remarks.
Merci. I would, again, just say thank you to all of you for being part of the Internet Society. Thank you for the work you do in your chapters. Thank you for helping us work together to make a globally connected, secure, and trustworthy internet that is available for everyone. I hope you'll take some of this information and look at ways that you can help improve your web servers. I hope you can help make your chapter web servers and special interest group web servers more secure, more available. I would also say too that it's hard sometimes. I will say, if you do the test and it turns out that you have a low percentage, a low score, do what you can. Sometimes it's hard. There are difficulties with doing it, particularly with some hosting providers. It can be challenging to go and make changes. But I would say start, try, see if there's small ones you can make. And also you can help promote the website, promote internet.nl, encourage other people to take a look at that test and learn about what they can do to make their websites more secure. So I would say that, again, thank you. And please feel free to email me, to engage with us on GitHub and connect other places. It would be, we'd love to help you in some way to see what we can do to collectively make the internet that much more secure and available to everyone. So thank you.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you, everyone, for your participation, for your active participation. We will meet when you will implement your activities locally, and see you soon. Thank you again. And thank you to the interpreters for their support today.